its annual Press Freedom Index, Reporters Without Borders state that in 2022, freedom and safety for journalists in the Middle East countries went from bad to worse, with Tunisia, Palestine, and Lebanon experiencing the most drastic drops in the region, and the situation in Algeria, Morocco, Libya, and Sudan being especially alarming. We have invited the Palestinian journalist and media activist Daoud Kuttab to analyze the situation and explain how Arab journalists are dealing with internal and external pressures to fulfill the media's duty to bring relevant issues to public debate, to strengthen and consolidate democracy. Daoud Kuttab is former Ferris Professor of Journalism at Princeton University and the current General Director of Community Media Network, an NGO based in Amman, dedicated to advancing independent media in the Arab countries. All along his professional career, Kuttab has worked both in print media as a documentary producer. In the 90s, he founded and presided over the Jerusalem Film Institute, collaborated in the establishment of the Arabic Media Internet Network, a censorship-free Arab website, and the Arab world's first internet radio station, AmmanNet. In the international arena, Kuttab's columns have appeared in the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and the Daily Telegraph, to mention some, and he has received several international awards, like the Committee to Protect Journalists' Freedom of Expression Award or the Next Foundation Peace Through Media Award. Also, the International Press Institute named him one of its World Press Freedom Heroes. This session is open to public, and after the lecture, a time for questions and debate with the audience will be open. Mr. Kuttab, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for agreeing to miss the football game today just to see me. So if I get the results, I'll give them to you as soon as anybody scores a goal, as long as it's Barcelona. So anyway, the other team, we don't cover their goals. I don't know, is this on? It's on here, but it's not on the big screen.
Oh, it's on back.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps I will sit there. I will sit right there, because if not, probably.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we're on now. The topic that we're discussing today is Arab press freedoms between external and internal pressure. And I'm going to surprise everybody here with my first statement. The Arab press is totally free in all the Arab countries on everything except what happens in each country. So Syrian press is really good on Algerian news, and Moroccan media is fabulous on Egyptian news. Palestinian media is great on everything, and so on. Every Arab country, we have the same language, and media is available. And that's one of my first projects. You mentioned Amin, was about trying to put all the media in one website so that you can break this situation. So the situation of the press in the Arab world is not good. Locally, it's, as I said, if you want to learn about other countries in your country, you learn a lot. But the moment that you start wanting to know about your own country, that's where the censorship and the problems and the restrictions happen. So I chose today to talk about the internal. So we have external and internal. I want to talk about the internal issues in each local country because I think it's much more genuine and much more interesting to do that. And so I'm focusing on what I call self-censorship in the Arab world, with special emphasis on Jordan. That's the country that I'm working in. So you will learn a little bit more about the self-censorship in Jordan. You have to understand that, again, there's some countries, being a journalist is a very, very dangerous job. You could lose your life, you could disappear, you might be arrested. In Jordan, we don't have these big problems. But there are smaller problems that we have that require a discussion. And I think most people don't think of self-censorship because a journalist, the raison d'etre of a journalist, according to the AP style book, is very simple: to know and to let know. Our job as a journalist, if you become a journalist, you're studying journalism, two things. That's it: to know and to let know. One of the problems we have is that journalism today, many journalists are able to know, but they're not able to let know. And we have to do something about that. That's where self-censorship begins. And then that's my question is why? Why do journalists who are really good, professional journalists, who get the information, who write it properly, who check their facts, are unable to publish their work? So my question is, why do some journalists in the Arab world refrain from speaking and writing freely? And I ask myself the first question: a human being's commitment is to make a living wage. Journalism, many people believe it's a calling. It's like a priest or a sheikh or a nurse or a teacher. But journalists are human beings and they need to feed their family. If you're unable to feed your family, if you're unable to make a living, you're not going to be a good journalist because you're not able to do your work. And so what happens is journalists, I don't want to say sell their conscience, but they have to make changes so that they can bring food to the family. And this is where self-censorship begins. So how bad is self-censorship in the Arab world? Okay? Center for Defending Journalists, the Jordanian, did a survey in 2022, just last year. According to their survey, 93% of Jordanian journalists practice self-censorship. It's the highest in the Arab world. Now, in other countries, again, in many other countries, you go to jail or something happens to you. So journalists in Jordan don't go to jail generally, and nothing happens to them. They're okay. But they, because of the way the government and the law is set up, they start doing their own, the work of the government to restrict. And this is where it's very dangerous. So I'm going to take you through the three sectors which make and contribute to self-censorship: media ownership, media's legal environment, and the absence of an independent media support. If we can deal with these three areas, then we can remove the obstacles that get into the way of journalists. Okay, media ownership. I don't know how much you know and you studied, but there are three kinds of media ownership. There's public and commercial and community. Now I put public and then I put between parentheses public-private because there's a very interesting hybrid in Jordan that doesn't exist in other countries. But let's go through the three main ownership. Who owns the media? The public, the country, and it's often called public service broadcasting, public service radio. This is paid for by the license fees, by the government, by the budget of the country. And the reason that it's paid for, because it's very expensive to produce good journalism. And because it's very expensive, the country, you know, like the BBC, I don't know what the Spanish equivalent, the country puts money into educating and keeping the public aware. In Jordan, every electric bill, every house pays 1 JD, about $1.50 every month. So, and it says it goes to public television. Now that's good, except the public television in many countries, I'm sure in Spain and other countries, are appointed a board that represents the whole country. So you have left and right, you have men and women, you have people from the capital and people from... In our country, public television is government TV. It's a mouthpiece of the government. It doesn't really allow the opposition much room. We have two public television stations, one general and one just 24-hour news called Al Mamlaka. But we have a new hybrid, which is that the main newspaper is owned, it's a private newspaper, stocks and everything, but the Social Security Department owns 65% of the #1 newspaper. So the government indirectly owns the newspaper. So that's why I call it public-private. But we also have the opposite. We have the army owns the #1 radio station. And it's running it as a commercial company. So they have advertising, they have the best DJs, they have really good music, but it's really owned by the army. And so the army, the PR people go to get advertising, and nobody doesn't give advertising to the army radio. We have the same thing with the police. A government should not be involved in competition with the media, but in our situation, it doesn't happen. Commercial media is where most of the media in the world is. There's commercial, and they seek audience, and they do good news, they don't do good news, and they... In our situation, the owners of the commercial media, most of them, are in bed with government, because if you are a big businessman and you need to import and export and you need contracts and so on, you need to have good relations with the government. And so a lot of the commercial media are close to the government. And that makes, again, that influences who's the editor and what the journalist is and what the editorial policy is. The third is community media. Community media is where the media is owned by an NGO or by a nonprofit. And a lot of radio stations are considered community radio because they're local, they serve the local community, so they're not governmental and they're not commercial. And I happen to run and be involved in and help establish a community radio station in Jordan called Radio Al Balad. We try our best to be honest and tell people the facts, but we also have problems because, again, we're under that pressure, and at the same time we are fighting self-censorship. So this is one of the problems we have. The second problem we talked about, so we talked about media ownership. Now we're going to talk about media's legal environment. So the Constitution, and I don't know how many of you are following the Arab countries, or I don't know if your students follow Arab countries, but if you look up the Constitution in any Arab country, you will see the words, freedom of the press is guaranteed. Okay, wow. But then you read the whole sentence. Freedom of the press and publication shall be ensured within the limits of the law. Again, freedom of the press is guaranteed in accordance with the law. And I have all kinds of things. The state shall guarantee freedom of opinion. Every Jordanian shall be free to express his opinion by speech, in writing, or by means of photographic representation, if such does not violate the law. So the law becomes the media has to go by the law, which means Constitution in any country is the highest law. In this case, the government or the writers of the Constitution gave up the right of freedom of expression and turned it down to the legislators. And because they know that the parliament is under their fingers, they know that they can pass laws that restrict the freedom of expression. And that's what we will talk about in a second. Now, those of you who studied the First Amendment in the United States, okay? Now, they do the opposite. They say, no law shall be passed that violates the freedom of expression. See the opposite? See, understand the point? So instead of the parliament making laws in the US, the Congress is not allowed by the Constitution to make any law. And anyone that tries to make a law, the Supreme Court would knock it down. In here, the opposite. In here, the Constitution shifts its own responsibility of the law of freedom of expression to the legislators. Now, let's see what kind of laws we have. Because, again, the Constitution is not protecting us. Let's see what the Parliament says. So we have a press and publications law. Press and publications law has many clauses. One of them is you cannot write anything upsetting a friendly country. So if you write something or you do a cartoon that doesn't please, now notice the word friendly. You can write really bad things about an unfriendly country, but a friendly country, it's a red line. Okay, we have cybercrime law. Now, let me give you some background to this. Now, the journalists in Jordan fought very hard to pass in the press and publications law that no journalist will ever be stopped for what they write. Nobody will go into jail. Great. So then when social media and digital media came on, they created a cybercrime law. Of course, they say there's a lot of cybercrime, people using this. So they created cybercrime law. And one of the articles, Article 11, says, basically, what you write in a print newspaper, nobody gets in trouble. You can write something, of course, unless it's to a bad, friendly country, and you will not go to jail. The moment at midnight, the IT person clicks public and goes online, they can arrest you for violating the cybercrime law. So the very same article, which is allowed in the print version, becomes not allowed in the online version. And this is not a theory. A number of journalists have been arrested and detained for what was public in a print newspaper, allowed, but then when it came online, they got in trouble. Now, when websites began, a lot of the young people, as you know, everybody has a phone, everybody's able to communicate. So a lot of people started creating independent websites. So the government said, wait a minute, you have to license websites. I don't know if you know this. In our country, a news site has to be licensed. You have to get a license, exactly the same license as a newspaper, which means you have to have a bank account, you have an office, you have... The most important thing is the editor. The editor-in-chief must be a member of the journalists' union. 4 years at least has already been in union. And we'll talk a little bit later why the journalists' union or syndicate is very pro-government. So we have a pro-government union, and you have a website, you have to hire somebody. Normally you just use their name and pay them a salary so that you can get your license. Now, our third issue that we talked about is, we said the media ownership is a problem, the media laws are a problem, but in many countries, the culture allows for the journalists to be free, the atmosphere of a country, and in this we have three problems that I'm talking about. First of all, the absence of a democratic environment. If a country is not very democratic, the press is not going to be democratic. So it goes without saying that if a country, and Freedom House issues reports, you can check them out, on all the countries of the world, and they say, this is semi-free, this is totally free, this is not free at all. So if a country is not free, the journalism is not going to be free. Now, I talked a little bit about the syndicate. Remember in the first issue we talked about media ownership, and we said the government owns the TV, 2 TV stations, owns the radio stations, owns newspapers. The syndicate is made up of people who work in the government media, or pro-government or semi-government media. Now, when the digital revolution came and a lot of people started setting up websites, they didn't allow them to join the journalists' union. And so the union became what we call a closed shop in the same way Soviet Union unions were. Very, very closed. They don't allow anybody in. Also, the environment of journalism requires a good civil society. Without a good civil society, journalism cannot succeed, and journalists will not be able to do their job. Now, if a journalist can bypass the media laws, can find a way to get around the ownership issue, can find a way to avoid the pressures, how does the government encourage, between parentheses, self-censorship? So they use bureaucratic means. Many countries, I mean, it's not about Jordan, many countries use it. So you want to renew your passport? There's a technical problem. Sorry, it's going to take a few weeks or months. And, you're traveling, all of a sudden, you're delayed. Oh, sorry, there's a problem with your paperwork, and you'll miss your airplane. So this is a message. So they're sending you a message. We don't like what you're doing. Oh, no, we like you, you're a nice guy. And you get the message that you're not liked. Sometimes, of course, this happens. You are rejected requests for interviews and comments, a journalist, you're welcome. If you are a journalist to cover the news in the way we like, but if we don't like what you're writing, we will not invite you. The same as press conferences that are interesting. Now, despite all that I said, we still have lots of journalists who fight. During the pandemic, a local TV station called Ru'ya TV sent a crew out to ask people, what do you think of the situation? They said, we have no money, we're going to steal to make ends meet. And they put it on TV. The government arrested the owner of the TV station and the editor-in-chief for like 5 days, and then they were released. But those 5 days caused a lot of people to say, my God, if the owner of a television station and the editor get arrested, who am I, just a local journalist? And it sent the fear of God in journalists. Oh, I want to make a living, I don't want to fight. Now, journalists also are creative. So sometimes journalists leak stories to the international media. Sometimes they circumvent. Tell you an interesting story. When I first began the local radio station in Jordan, radio was not allowed. Private radio was not allowed. It was only government radio. And King Abdullah was the new king, and his people were saying, internet is going to be free in Jordan, you could do anything on the internet. So I asked the question, I said, does that include radio? And he said, as long as it's on the internet, it's okay. Where you can do a radio station on the internet. Oh, excited. So I went to an Italian friend of mine who works on radio. I said, Francisco, I want to set up an internet radio. And he started laughing. I said, why are you laughing? He said, people set up FM, and if they have extra money, they go on internet. I said, yeah, but they don't allow FM in our country. Okay. So he said, we'll help you. So we set up this is the year 2000. The internet was really new. So we set up a radio station online, and we broadcast it. 10 people were listening to us, maybe 15 at the most. But then something happened that gave us a break. The Palestinian Second Intifada started, and there were demonstrations in Jordan in support of the Intifada. So I called up a friend of mine in Bethlehem. He had a local radio station, and I said, Fadi, are you interested in the demonstrations in Jordan? Yes, sure. Do you have internet? Of course. Can you open up ammannet.net? He did. And I said, can you broadcast our stuff? Yes. So all of a sudden, imagine this. We're in a country that doesn't allow FM radio. We're broadcasting on the internet, being picked up in the West Bank, and rebroadcast, and we could hear it in Amman. So I keep telling people we're doing something totally illegal, but in a legal way. So we went around the government in a legal way. We didn't violate the law, but people were able to hear us. Of course, within 3 years, they gave us an FM license, and we're working now on FM. So people use creative things sometimes to circumvent. One of the problems is that many journalists publish things without their name because they can get in trouble. And sometimes they do it with Arab media based in the diaspora. What this means is that journalists can get no credit and sometimes no payment for their effort. And again, so you practice self-censorship in your own media, but everybody knows what you're doing because of what I said earlier. People in Damascus know what's happening in Algeria, and people in Morocco knows what's happening in Egypt, but not about their own country. So, let me finalize my speech. Journalism is freedom is tantamount to democratic freedom. You cannot have one without the other. Any country that's not democratic, the press is not going to be free. But in the last year in Jordan, the political reform began. They created 3 modernization lines. They made a new electoral law, and they announced that in 10 years, Jordan, which is a monarchy, will become a constitutional monarchy like England or even Spain and so on. So in the first year, which is next summer, we will have 30% elected members of local parties, and every next year will add, so within 10 years, there will be totally party-based, multi-party-based parliament, because right now the parliament is mostly government appointees that, go through sham elections. So within 10 years, supposedly, we're going to have a democratic system. Why I say this? Because already we're seeing small changes and improvements in the way journalism is taken. So again, my statement that democracy and freedom of the press go hand in hand. If things are becoming more democratic, you'll see that things open up in the freedom of the press. So this is my email, my WhatsApp. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'll be very happy. And thank you so much for listening to my lecture on self-censorship in the Arab region.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience who want to share some comments or ask a question? Where is yours? Thank you. No questions? Then let me start by asking you, what are the red lines? What are the topics that are not considered forbidden or the base for this self-censorship?
There are constitutional issues, but there are non-constitutional issues. Most journalists stay away from criticizing the army, the king, of course, it's not allowed by constitution. But the biggest problem has to do with what we call internal fiber of a country. So if you write something that angers a particular tribe and can cause tribal problems, that's a really big problem. Of course, issues of corruption against top-level people is a really big problem that is a huge problem that causes problems for journalists. Sometimes the issue of religious differences, Christians and Muslims, or Muslims within Muslims, for example. We have the law of inheritance allows a person dies, the women get half of what the men get, according to Islamic tradition. Now, there's some movement now against that, and that, again, it's not very popular, and you get in trouble for that. Again, what I said, if you say something against Qatar or against the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, you're in big trouble. You say about Israel, it's allowed. But if you talk about Qatar, it's a problem, or United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia or even Syria. I mean, except when Syria was, in the beginning, they were allowing people to attack Syria, but now, no. Now they're trying to improve relations. So it's basically things that the government considers to be sensitive, but they're not necessarily sensitive. I'll give you an example. A month ago, Human Rights Watch issued a report on human rights in Jordan. None of the major media published it. Why not? The government didn't make a statement about it, and nothing happened. 2 months ago, we had a trucker strike in the south of Jordan. The major media didn't publish anything for 2 weeks, not a word. After 2 weeks, all of a sudden, breaking news, the trucker strike is over. What trucker strike? We didn't even know that there was a trucker strike. Even that became a joke because the truckers didn't stop their strike. It was a government trying to railroad that the strike is over, and the strike went on for another 2 weeks, but it was really over. So these are the kinds of things that are, journalists and owners of the media practice self-censorship on, and you don't follow them, they'll fire you. And so, again, you want to feed your family, you have to think twice. Instead of rewarding you for bringing a scoop, in a normal newspaper, you get rewarded if you get exclusive story of corruption. No, you become popular. No, the opposite. Microphone.
Before you just said that in Jordania, as a journalist, you are not allowed to make critics about friendly countries. So I don't know the diplomatic relations between Israel and Jordania, so I would like to ask you, what is the journalistic perspective about Israel?
Well, there is a general consensus among Jordanians that Palestinians have rights to be free from occupation. Also, the king of Jordan is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He's a 43rd descendant, and his family runs Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Jordanians have very special relationship. Also, nearly half the Jordanians are of Palestinian origin. So all of that adds to the position of supporting Palestinians. There is a peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, and there was some opposition to it, but not huge. Even when things happen, there is small demonstrations, but people understand that you cannot have, you have a peace agreement, you need it for security, for relationship with America. But recently the changes in Israel are taking a much more racist and fascist direction, and that's not, people don't like that. But everyday food, to be honest with you, is more important than Palestine, Israel, or anything else. People want to eat. If their son is not working, we have a big drug problem because a lot of drugs are being smuggled from Syria. Those are big stories. But yeah, especially when things happen in Al-Aqsa, because religion is very emotional for people. Are we okay on time?
Yeah, perfectly fine. We'll expect to finish.
I'm fine.
Yes. In your opinion, what are the countries in the region with less freedom of expression and the ones with more democracy or freedom?
I didn't hear.
According to you, what are the most free countries regarding freedom of expression?
Which countries?
Are the ones who have the most freedom of expression?
There is an index that lists countries. So I think it's accurate, it's generally accurate. It used to be a long time ago, Lebanon used to be quite good in the Arab region. Kuwait used to be not bad. But again, you're talking about inter-Arab countries, the MENA region, or you're talking about the world?
No.
In the MENA region, I would say, again, like Qatar is really good with Al Jazeera, except on issues about Qatar. So we were back to the same issue I talked about. Emirates is good on other issues, but the Emirates, CNN is in Abu Dhabi. I'm starting to see interesting opening in Saudi Arabia, believe it or not. The media is opening up much more. I mean, you know what happened to my friend Jamal Khashoggi, but there's opening up the country and the press is opening up. Again, compared to other international standards, it's very bad. But in the region, Iraq also is opening up and it's getting out of the troubles. Palestine, the press is okay, it's good, usually. I mean, we've had trouble all the time. I mean, I was imprisoned by the Palestinian government for what I do. So it's not perfect, but in comparison, to Syria and Egypt, I would say Palestine and Jordan are better. Tunisia used to be very good. Now, last week they arrested the owner of a radio station in Tunisia. Algeria, hopefully. Morocco is not bad. Actually, Morocco, again, sometimes, where you have journalists arrested are actually countries that are opening up. I mean, in Syria, nobody's arrested because they're killed. But in Morocco, some people are arrested, which means that it's a very vibrant society. So I don't want to give, ranking. I think RSF and others do a much better job, and they're quite good.
Hi, so I didn't really understand why a journalist can be arrested if they post the same article.
Can you bring...
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay, so I didn't really understood the difference, why a journalist can be arrested if they post online the same article that has been printed. I mean, where is the difference between posting it online or printed?
Between online and print?
Yeah, you said before.
Okay.
I'm right?
Yeah. Before there was digital media, it was only print. So we had what's called the Press Publications Law, which is about the press. And journalists fought very hard to put in the law that no journalist will be stopped for what they write. It's in the law, which is good, okay? Then came cyber issues, digital media. And the country or the security people stuck. They went around the press and publication law by adding this Article 11. So again, you can have the same article in print, nothing happens to you. If they don't put it online, you don't get in trouble. But if they put it online, they can pull you for like a week or 2 weeks before a judge. Because by that time, you're in jail for 2 weeks. The next time you say, I don't want to get in trouble anymore. And so you start practicing self-censorship. So this is where the problem is. We're fighting hard to remove that article, and there's a lot of demonstrations against the government and petitions. We're signing petitions to remove that article. And even international organizations, our RSF and others, are also sending letters to the government to remove Article 11. I don't know if I understood your question.
Yeah, I was more asking myself why, if it's the same information, you can't put it online, but you can publish it on print.
I understand that it's illogical. I agree with you.
I don't really understand that.
You're absolutely right. But the law, again, when the Constitution gave up its power to the government or to the parliament, it allowed the parliament to decide. So the parliament made two laws that, as you said, they're contradictory. On the one hand, the press and publications law is one thing, and the cybercrime law is another thing. So there's a contradiction within the law. Now, maybe we should somehow go to the Constitutional Court to decide how to resolve this contradiction. But you're absolutely right. This is illogical.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry for my English. I would like to ask you who has been covered the Iranian demonstrations in Jordanian media, which is the established position in media about all this wave of demonstrations that took place in.
I can't hear.
It's the image that the demonstrations of Iranian women asking for freedom has in the Jordanian media. So what's the narrative about the country?
You know, in politics, countries sometimes get away with things. China, for example, gets away with a lot of violations because it's a very powerful country. All the American dollars are in China. So America is forced to accommodate China, even though it's violating human rights all the time. So countries, when they deal with each other country, they have to weigh what's more important, our interest, our economy, or human rights. Unfortunately, human rights is not the top priority. And even though the image might be hurt, as you said, countries get away with it. Now, of course, you know, if you follow the media in English of many countries, it sounds very good. If you look at the truth in Arabic and what's published in Arabic media, it's different. Even in many countries, in Jordan, the Jordan Times in English is much more open than the Arabic newspapers. Because it's read by the diplomats and, you know, okay, they can read whatever they want. And so, I think what is the Lumiere was the famous theater, was allowed to say anything against inside the palace, but he's not allowed to take his plays outside of the palace. As long as it's within the palace, you could say anything you want. And so, yes, there is a contradiction. That's a reality. But I think human rights and journalism rights is not a high priority in the international arena. And the image issue, I agree with you. I think it's bad for the image, but somehow they're able to overcome it.
But my question was about Iran.
In Iran? Oh, okay.
The Iran demonstrations covered in the Jordanian.
Yeah.
Iran demonstrations covered by Jordanian press.
Yeah, I mean, we did cover the Iranian demonstrations in Jordan, but not a lot, to be honest with you. And it was not a big story, unfortunately. I would like to do more. I wish I put on my Twitter more, but Jordan is a country that is very moderate. And it keeps good relations with all the countries, including Iran. And so they did not, I think they didn't stop us, they didn't put pressure, but it was not a big story, unfortunately.
What are your expectations of the chances that the journalist can play a role in this democratic process that Jordania is going to?
You know,
fixing all those.
Yeah, journalists have a hard time because on the one hand, we're supposed to be neutral and objective and not take sides and not join any political party. Yet we're dealing with issues of public interest. So, you know, for example, I never sign any petition. The only petition I sign is if there is a problem against journalists. Anything else, nuclear, not nuclear, LGBT, yes or no, capital punishment, I never sign. Because I have to be fair and honest. If I sign a petition, then I'm taking a position. I should try my best not to take a position. Yes, for sure, we're for democratic issues and so on. But I think we do our work through publishing, not through being advocates. Civil society should be advocates. Political parties should advocate for democracy. Journalists are supposed to give the truth, to know and to let know. That's our job.
No more questions?
You ready for a test?
How do you see, following the question of, about the Israel, how do you see the new Israeli government and the relations? Do you think that can change, can be harder from, with Netanyahu's government and the policies they are announcing at least?
In a strange way, this is the best thing that happened to Palestinians.
Yeah.
Because we're now seeing the real face of the Israelis. And many countries in the West who keep saying, we have shared values with Israel, have a hard time defending their position. Canada, last month, stopped using the word shared values when they deal with Israel. So again, the reason that Israel succeeds in getting away with murder, as we say, is because there is the feeling that it's a democratic country that respects democracy. It is a democratic country for Jews, for sure, but not for people under occupation. And I think this is what is helping. I mean, Netanyahu and his right-wing racist people are exposing the reality on the ground.
Okay.
أهلا وسهلا.
Exactly. Thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Mr. Kuttab, for the journey to know a little bit more about the Jordanian press. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Now we have to find out who won the game.